it was kind of
suspiciously quickly. I have my own thoughts on that. I agree.
Yeah, this ain't the pod for it. We can do that on
save it for the theology podcast.
Yeah.
Speak Easy Studios. Speak and be heard.
Yo, this is Stephen Lee.
And I'm Frank Jackson.
And we are the Distinguished Critics. We're here to break down some of our favorite albums and songs and debate what's overrated, underrated, and everything in between. So join us as we go back and relive some of music's most iconic projects. Give us a listen wherever you get your podcasts, and please remember to rate, review, subscribe, and give us those 5 stars. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another edition of This or That. I'm Stephen Lee, as always, joined by Frank Jackson, and today we are going to be discussing 2 pivotal group albums released in the year of our Lord, 1995. That's right, we're talking about Bone Thugs and Harmony's East 1999 Eternal, released on July 25th, and Goodie Mob's debut Soul Food, released on November 7th, 1995. Frank, how you doing today, man?
I'm good. I'm particularly excited about this one because I think these are 2 perfect albums that talk about very similar things from 2 very different perspectives. And I think that it highlights the contrast in these groups. So, yeah, I think this is, I'm biased. I think we always pick great shit, but I am particularly excited.
Except for that Nostradamus Dogfather debate, Well, we're gonna be doing more of those too, so it's not always gonna be 2 monumental pillar projects of the '90s. Yeah. So where do you want to start? Bone Thugs, Goodie Mob. I mean, they both got some interesting stories.
Oh, you start with Bone.
Let's start with Bone. So Bone in the early '90s, coming from Cleveland, Ohio. Not exactly a hip hop mecca. No offense to Cleveland, the land, but really
a music mecca, but not a hip hop mecca.
Yeah, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, all that good stuff is in Cleveland. But yeah, in terms of 1992, 1993, I mean, it was really L.A., New York, and that's about it.
Yeah, typicals.
So
you had like Luke, but that's just a standalone thing, really. I mean, there just wasn't, you got Ghetto Boy. It was just really just splintered off random shit. Other places.
Other artists would pop up, but there was
New York and the West Coast were the only places like
the big regional scenes
like that.
For sure. Bone, Bone was scrounging and scraping in the early 90s, trying to push their sound. And, obviously when we're talking about 30 plus years ago, I feel like the group dynamic was a little bit more in effect than certainly what we've seen in the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Definitely. That's not a thing anymore.
It's not R&B, hip hop. You just don't see groups, period. But I always kind of likened Bone to like the Temptations, in the sense that, like, they've
got some observations about that.
Yeah,
certainly.
Yeah, they all have their own little pocket in terms of the harmonization, and Busy Bone probably playing the role of David Ruffin in this case. There was always group issues and alcoholism, and various versions of the group.
I mean, their downfall was themselves. All the infighting, all of the just splintered off like random side projects, and then
you get like a Wishbone project with Flesh and Bone, and
like Wu-Tang has all those like subgroups,
Killer Bees,
that are weird. Like Bone Thugs kind of has like a similar thing
for sure,
where they'll just splinter off and like, I'm gonna just make this album with my uncle.
Yeah,
it's like, what the fuck? Okay,
it wasn't Uncle Charles.
Yeah, no, it was not him.
We'll get to Uncle Charles.
We miss him.
Yeah, I miss my Uncle Charles, yo. Yeah. I actually did have an Uncle Charles, but last I checked, he's still alive. So
okay,
yeah. But Bone in the
We're
early.
all happy to know that.
Okay, yeah, and if he is deceased, then I'm sorry, Uncle Charles, I miss you.
There you go.
Bone in the early '90s. I mean, they were shopping their demos everywhere. They primarily out on the West Coast, right? Because you knew that nothing, at least from a hip hop perspective, was going to pop in Cleveland. They weren't going to blow up in Cleveland. You kind of had to go to these 2 major markets in order for you to even be recognized. And this is an era, pre SoundCloud and pre blogs, and just being able to throw your music out there.
Physically carry your product somewhere.
Yeah. So they always had a lot of talent, and I think that Bone, in a lot of ways, were way ahead of their time. I think that a lot of what you hear now, like certainly you could attribute it to Nelly and Ja Rule and stuff, but I feel like the sing-songy, like true, like singing on records and still like actually spitting, like that kind of started with Bone to me.
Yeah, in a way that's, I mean, truly like sing, because these dudes are, I mean, don't get it twisted, like disregard the subject matter, they are singing. Yeah. Like they really are singing, and yeah, sure, harmonizing, but it's much closer to singing than it is like, say, what 50 Cent does.
Right.
Kind of, but to touch on your point, ironically, even though, yeah, you're not going to make it in Cleveland at the time, ironically, they went out to the West Coast to try to get their stuff to Easy after Easy had promised them that he would give them a call, give them a listen, and then never fulfilled that promise.
Right.
So they went out to the West Coast to look for him, basically, because they had to grind to get it. They were out there for months.
Right.
And then Easy, as it turns out, was doing some shows in Cleveland.
Yeah.
So they had to go back home, and technically that is where they got
started.
That's where they got their start. So after all of that, they had to go to the West Coast, but ultimately the West Coast came to them.
Yeah.
And then
there's some funny stories about like their peddling demos too.
Yeah.
I mean, like I recently heard a Tone Loc interview on The Art of Dialogue, and apparently they showed up at his house at like 2 a.m, like, hey, we're rappers, which I mean, I guess you kind of had to do that back in the day.
Well, it's funny because Tone Loc would have been somebody to see back in the day.
For sure.
Tone Loc was a big deal.
Yeah, Ace Ventura, Funky Cold Medina, Tone Loc.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bone Thugs, I believe before they met Easy, they had him on the phone. And they did the whole, like, kind of like rapid fire, like, boom, bada, boom, 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 like all of that. And he's like, okay, I'm kind of interested in this. And Easy always had an incredible ear for talent. I mean, like, it goes without saying, Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, him assembling and really putting a stamp on NWA.
More or less gave them their name, too.
Cocaine is another one that Ruthless kind of cultivated and put out there above the law. So Easy, I feel like we kind of have to talk about Eazy-E when speaking of Bone Thugs, especially around this time period.
Of course.
People correctly assess his career in like 1992 and 93 is like, man, he was like the laughing stock of hip-hop, right? But I'll say this about Easy. Again, he knew how to find talent, and he really had an ear for that and knew how to push it. So he was ahead of the curve and even giving them a chance and saying, okay, we're going to try this out here.
Well, Easy was a hell of a boss from that perspective, and I would say even in that sense, he was ahead of his time.
And we always mention the Suge Knights and the Master P's, but Easy
and never really talk about because Easy never did get to
see it fully developed,
fulfill that whole thing. So yeah, Bone, originally their first name was like the Band-Aid Boys, which is awful. It just sounds like you get beat up every week and then you have to I don't know, patch yourself up. It's just a stupid name.
It is a very I didn't even
know horrible
that.
Name.
That is a stupid name.
And then eventually, and all of this was without Flesh and Bone, he joined last, and he's been in and out of that group throughout time. But
were they just so after the Band-Aid Boys and
Bone Enterprise,
and then were they just Bone at one point?
Well, so then Easy. Once they got on with Easy, he wanted them to change it to Thugs in Harmony, but they wanted to keep Bone, so it became Bone Thugs in Harmony.
So quite the name.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, if you really, our whole lives, like, it's just been kind of accepted like normal. But when you think about it, it's like, what a weird name.
Yeah,
just like Bone Thugs in Harmony.
With the little hyphens.
The Harmony part totally makes sense.
For sure.
I mean, that's their thing, but it's just it's a funny name. But yeah, so. They release Creeping on a Come Up.
Yep, the EP. That was their first release with Ruthless Records.
Yes. And that was successful. People liked that album.
I think it went quadruple platinum if I'm not mistaken.
It was a huge hit. That was successful. And things got just talk about a 180. It's not like Easy was known to himself or anyone to be living with HIV and
full-blown AIDS the way they describe it.
Yeah, then right.
Yeah. I don't even think there was an HIV diagnosis
from the time Easy kind of went to the hospital and they told him about, like, he died like really quickly.
Yeah.
It was kind of
suspiciously
like,
quickly. I have my own thoughts on that. I
agree.
Yeah.
This ain't the pod for it. We can do that on
Save it for the theology podcast.
Yeah. When we put on our tinfoil hats and do our other podcasts, we can talk about that. But he died suspiciously quickly.
Yeah.
Even for that time, like now we got medicines that prolong life in a way that it didn't back then. But even for that time, Freddie Mercury even lived a few years.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
yeah, Easy passes in March of '95. Now, Creeping on a Come Up is a huge record. I mean, it did go quadruple platinum. You have For the Love of Money on there. You have Thuggish Ruggish Bone, and the crazy part, I mean,
which is one of my favorite bass lines that there's ever been.
Oh, for sure, it still slaps. But like the crazy part about the whole Creeping on a Come Up and the ruthless like involvement is it directly tied them into like the Death Row thing too.
Yes.
But Jewel, of Death Row is actually on that record, which is crazy, doing background vocals.
Right.
But yeah, Bone Thugs kind of jumped on the scene. I mean, they were certainly different and unique enough to like really grab your attention.
Very much so.
This isn't like, all right, another guy like J. Rue the Damager or something, like another guy with bars, or like they were.
He just caught us straight for no reason. But yeah.
J. Rue was cool, but
that's fair. So Easy passes.
Right.
And East 99 releases, and obviously part of the album is a tribute to him. He's even in one of the windows on the album cover, way up near the top floor.
I believe it came out 4 months after he passed.
4 months after he passed. But in between that time, there was a lot of, like they've even given voice to, we thought this shit was over.
Yeah.
Like when Easy passed, because Easy really was that much, that instrumental in their careers.
Right.
And
the day to day and like
they
really
kind of felt
that.
like they had no, like, what are we going to do now?
Right.
And this album comes out and they're bigger than ever.
Yeah, if there were any doubters, like, they had the first record and it's an EP. I forget how many songs were on that, maybe 8 or 9 or something like that. But this comes out and it's another quadruple platinum album with another series of singles that, like, you're still going to hear today.
Yeah.
Like, I remember the first time I heard The Crossroads, for example. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. I mean, that record was
Crossroads
unavoidable.
was one of those songs that, like, sitcoms were riffing on. Like, just it was really just part of the zeitgeist. Like, it was
transcended
in everyone's
hip-hop.
Yeah, exactly.
It transcended. It became like a pop thing.
Exactly. So this album comes out, they blow up bigger than ever, and I always thought it was funny because of exactly how different they are, and that obviously plays into them blowing up. But it's just it's like I said, if you break down almost everything about Bone Thugs to like it's no pun intended, but it's bare bones, then it's actually kind of funny because it's like to me, it's like even if you listen to like, okay, so there's a song in this album called Me Killer, and it's like if Boys to Men started a doo-wop group in Angola or some shit. It's just
the right amount of thuggishness to it. Yeah.
They're talking about like the darkest, most murderous, evil, heinous shit, but they're singing it. And it's just hilarious to me. Like but it sounds great. It's aged so well.
They were kind of a little bit of a horrorcore group when they started out.
100%.
I mean, you got Mr. Ouija board on this album.
They are singing to Ouijas. They're basically summoning dark magic on this album. They're making references to like Leatherface and serial killers. And this album is so much about death and murder, and on a deeper level, if you will, it's just a glimpse into the mind of people growing up in that environment and how they have to get their money, or how they at least feel they have to get their money, and how they feel like they need to get by. And it's just about a lot of death and robbery. And
there's a theme of their, like, even if you look at later projects like Resurrection and the Art of War and stuff like that, like it was always kind of a theme with them, but they because of their ability to like do the sing-song thing, you don't.
You almost forget that that's what it's about.
Correct. That's exactly what I'm trying to get at. It's one of those things where like they have the song Mo Murda, and like,
which is a banger.
A banger, right? But like the theme of this album is really, really dark, and somehow it's like their ability to craft these songs like kind of overshadows all of that in a good way.
And speaking of Mo Murda, they used the Bootsy Collins "I'd Rather Be With You" sample on that song.
I didn't even notice that.
Yes, and that's just yet another. You know, it's one of the funniest things to me in music is when somebody uses a sample of something that was so beautiful and they use it for a song that's just like completely like demonic and just evil and heinous. Like that's what made it even funnier.
One of those examples, like I was listening to the other day, not to get too far off topic, but I love Gene Chandler, old like 60s doo-wop singer. He has this song called The Duke of Earl, and it's the most doo-wop song ever, but Cypress Hill flipped that into Hand on the Pump, and it's like
Cypress Hill would do exactly that.
Correct.
To it. Yeah. So it's just I always found that just funny as like a little side thing about hip-hop where people would take just something that had nothing to do with anything like evil and just turn it into Mo Murda.
I didn't even notice. I'm not gonna lie, and I'm usually like the guy that would notice stuff like that.
If you go watch when you listen to it now, you're gonna hear that shit immediately.
Yeah.
I would say one thing that is particularly interesting to me about this album is they really aren't showing you in terms of subject matter and content. They're showing you absolutely no versatility. There is no glimmer of hope on this album. There's no
first of the month maybe being the only thing,
sure.
or in the crossroads, like just in terms
but
of
even
like
that shit. That's just like somebody that thinks like me did this to some of my homies and now I miss them. Like it's not all about their friends. Obviously, it's about family members.
Easy and Uncle Charles,
of course. Shout out to him again.
Yes.
They're talking about pets on there, and I think Lazy mentions his daughter on that song. He had like an infant daughter who died.
Jesus.
So
somehow took an even darker turn.
It did, right?
Yeah.
So, but this album is so
it's cohesive,
dark, and there's so much despair, and that's all it is, right? But the thing is that what shines through is the talent. Mm-hmm. Like these dudes are still some of the most talented dudes I think that have ever. Now, anyone can debate individually how they feel about any of them,
and I have some strong opinions on that.
Yes, but as a collective, as a group,
complementing each other very well.
It's brilliant,
right?
It's hard to do.
Right.
That's not something that's. It cannot be overstated how difficult it is to have 4 or 5 dudes
that have all somehow cultivated this style, and some better than others. But again, I go back to like the Temptations thing, because you do have like a falsetto guy. Yeah. You do have like a Lazy.
They really did have it set
Lazy
up
kind of has like the middle part of it, and then Crazy's a little bit more of like almost like the baritone. Yep. You recognize him. Yep. I think Wish is horrible. Never liked Wishbone. I'm glad he was left off songs like Notorious Thugs with Biggie and stuff like. It's like, you know what, we really don't need Wish. But I'll say for this project, I don't think Wish like kills it, you know, like in a bad way.
No.
I think this is Bone Thugs at like their peak for sure.
Oh, agreed.
Yeah.
Now that being said, I would say the downside, because yes, their creativity shines through in their just in terms of like their
stylistically.
Yeah, just how they're able to put it together, creativity shines through. They don't have a whole lot to talk about aside from murder. That's really all that they talk about. But the downside to them kind of being a one-trick pony is that so much of the album just sounds like
the same
one song.
Yeah. And not
and it's not for lack of. I don't think the production sucks at all. I don't think the production sucks.
I don't think the production is a strength either, though.
No, it's not particularly strong, but I wouldn't point to this and say like the production is holding this album back. I actually think the production is perfect for them.
Right.
Like it's just more so so many of the songs and because of what they're talking about, like certain things can make a song drastically different because the subject matter is different.
Right. Even if the production were to sound
similar.
Right.
But since they're talking about the same thing and the production is pretty similar throughout, fairly similar throughout.
I would say we've discussed a lot of albums on these episodes, and this is one that kind of like really stands out in terms of, man, it's not in a Parliament type of way where it all sounds like one big song and you enjoy it because it's like a big groove session. Like this just, by the end of this album, it feels tiring.
It felt tedious.
Yeah. Like, well, I like Mo Murda. That kind of like is towards the end of the album, but like,
well, there's songs that I really, really like on here.
Same
Absolutely.
Here. I just think Bone is one of those
But
groups.
it does sound like just one big, long, good song. But, you know, it does become kind of, it's like in a tattoo.
Exhausting.
Like, it just keeps poking that same spot repeatedly.
Right.
And it's not painful. It just becomes grating, although a tattoo can be painful, whatever. But, like, it's just more so... It's just poking. It just keeps poking you like, okay, all right. And then this is.
I just never viewed Bone as a group that like. Let me think of how to say this. Like, I don't particularly enjoy the thought of like 18 songs from Bone Thugs and Harmony.
Right, and I think that's what
they are more style than substance.
Yes,
and because the production is good, because the production is good and not great, like. It makes it it's a little bit harder to stomach all of that.
I think I would certainly agree with that. It's the length of the album does them no favors because they are just that one thing. Mm-hmm. So
that's why I think Creeping on a Come Up is like such like
if you give
package it tightly like that.
You give me 10 to 13 of these.
Mm-hmm. And especially because you have 4, and if you're including Flesh and Bone, like you have 5 members on a song. So how long are these songs, Frank? I mean, they're 4 or 5 minutes each song. So it's like you know what you're getting. And again, it really shines in certain spots, like First of the Month, like some of these Mo Murda, some of these records. But like again, after a while, you're like, I feel like I've heard this 3 or 4 songs ago.
You do get that feeling throughout the album.
DJ Unique did these beats, by the way.
Yes,
he's solid to me.
Yeah, that's the thing is like there's nothing particularly bad or even below average or even just average, I would say, about this album. I think everything is at least above average on this album, and I think they're crazy talented, and what they're able to pull off is incredibly difficult, but it does run
its course
a bit long.
Yeah.
And I don't need for every album I listen to just be this super deep type of
or personal,
album that
whatever,
has all of these different
checking
subject
off
matters but I also am not necessarily trying to listen to 17 songs about chopping people up.
Correct.
And, like, you know, it's just kind of it's just a little too much. Not even in terms of goriness or like me saying that it's too like demonic or anything. It just gets repetitive.
Right.
That's all it is. It's just the repetitiveness of it.
You can't overstate too how just big Bone Thugs was around this time. And I feel like one thing that people don't talk about, and I wish they would give Bone a little bit more credit with, is obviously, yes, they've paved ways for a lot of artists that tried to do what they did and came after. Like, I would argue like 3-6 around this time tried to do that, but to a much lesser effect, like because they don't have the rapid fire delivery. They don't have like
one thing they definitely have in common. 3-6 was also, I mean, look at their name, but that was also another group who was on some more dark, like demonic type of shit, which is not something you really hear in hip hop. Not then, not now. Like it's not super common thing. That's just not really common.
You could go find it if you dig hard enough.
Yeah.
Pun intended, you know, get your shovel, whatever. But like it's not ever going to be a mainstream
that's not something
thing.
That's
Bone
really,
took it mainstream.
That's not really something that's popular among black people, period. Like, you know, just because we grow up with, you know, these super religious, like, family members, like, you know, it's rare to see that.
Right.
Probably more common now than it was then, but so that was something that made them unique.
They were huge, man. Just to get back on that real quick.
That Ouija board shit, like, it's just like, it's different. It's kind of, when you listen to it, it's almost like, what the hell made them come up with it? When they were in the studio, they're like, we're gonna sing to a Ouija board.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's kind of weird. Like, they're asking it to show them, like, the way. Like, it's just, they're very, very different, and in a good way, but in a way that I also think ran its course with people. Like, aside from them getting in their own way, like they did, I think that's something that eventually
would have happened anyway.
Yes.
They are an act of the 90s that was as big as your Pac, Biggie, Nas, whoever you want to mention, Cube, whoever.
And
they were,
yeah.
If not bigger. They were on that Grammy level because they had such crossover success. But yeah, I don't think that they would have, even if they had stayed together, right? I don't think that the way they approach their songs and their subject matter and all of that, I don't think that would have carried over for, like, a 10, 15, 20-year career where they're continuously dropping excellent albums. Do you think this is a classic?
Yes.
What would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10? Because it's a classic, right, in terms
but
of...
you're asking me objectively. So if you're asking me if it's a personal classic, no. But it is a classic.
Right.
It is a classic.
You tip your hat to it. You acknowledge it as such because of all of the impact that we've discussed that it had. But, like, man, it's an album I hadn't heard in probably 10, 15 years, and I'm probably not going to listen to it again anytime soon.
No. I mean, it's not...
maybe a few choice cuts, but, like, that's the extent of it.
It's a good album. Personally, it's a good album to me. I'll probably give it a 7.5,
That's
maybe.
kind of where I have it, like a 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I mean, there's...
For the album itself, musically,
right.
lyrically, what they're bringing to the table, I think their style elevates it a little bit, because if they didn't sound as good as they did, then this album's probably a 4 or a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I just think...
Which sounds crazy to even say about East 1999, Eternal, and Bone Thugs and Harmony, but I don't think that a lot of this is really aged particularly well.
No, I think Bone Thugs deserves a lot of credit for just what they kind of paved the way for, or if you at least don't think they paved the way for, they were an important step along the way of certain things. Like, for one, they made stoner music a lot more. Stoners still listen to Bone Thugs songs about weed. Like, it's, that's just part of it.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one thing that they've always done consistently well. Yes. And even on some of these splinter projects that we touched on earlier,
they have some
Busy
some
Bone had Friday from Next Friday and stuff like that. So they have elements really well. Of things that they are excellent at, but it's just, I don't know, man. I don't know if it was, like, really my cup of tea like that.
Yeah.
As like all of the new Bone Thugs albums coming, like, by 2002, 3, 4, and beyond, and they had a few hits around that time. I was not checking for Bone Thugs and Harmony.
No. But that being said, I think if I were to describe it, like, in sports terms, if I'm looking at, like, an athlete as a prospect, I would say Bone Thugs
is what, like Bo Jackson or something? Like,
no, not even comparing it to a player. Just, like, as a prospect, it's high floor, low ceiling. Like, the album doesn't reach any, like, highs that are any type of mind blowing, but it's a high floor because it's gonna be good enough for you to call it good.
And I'll say that I don't think that there's, like, any, like, whoa, this is some whack shit on here. Like, it's even keeled.
Nor
throughout.
The opposite.
Right.
Nor is there gonna be some, damn, this shit is great.
Right.
Like, it's not going to be either one of those things. It's going to be, but it's also not, it's not mid. It's just, it's good.
Yeah, it's good.
It's good.
And I felt like Bone, in terms of, like, that, oh my God, did you hear that? They worked better on features with stuff like that.
Agreed.
Like, on Thug Love with Pac,
yes.
Obviously Notorious Thugs, but like, even like Crazy Bone on Little John's I Don't Give a Fuck, and songs like that, like, sign me up for
Certainly.
that. Yeah.
If them on features, that'll be something where it's like, damn. But just album wise,
whole
I don't
album.
know. What do you have a favorite track on this?
I would probably go Mo Murda.
Mo Murda.
Yeah,
That's
I like that. I like the
easy top three.
Kind
for
of like
me.
the chimes in the background too,
Mhm.
and that kind of screwed up type of hook
Yeah.
that they start off with,
Yeah.
and the beat is kind of thumping, and I feel like everybody does their thing on it. So I'd
I
probably
do
go.
love the horrorcore aspect of this album. That kind of
Yeah.
like
It's different.
dark, like organ type of sound. They do have that throughout. I do love that sound.
Mhm.
I would probably say "Land of the Heartless"
Okay.
is my favorite on the album. And to speak to what I was just saying about high floor, low ceiling, I do have a favorite track, but I don't have a least favorite track.
I agree
because
with
I
that.
don't think any of them are bad. Like
Nope.
I can listen to all the tracks and
Yeah.
they're all good.
Yeah.
It's just that none of them are like excellent or that creative.
Right.
They're super talented. They're special, but the track as a whole is good.
Their misses are more. It's not so much like, oh, that's bad. It's like you forget it.
Yeah,
you
that's what
forget
it
about it.
is.
It's just like, oh, okay. And like this song is on here, like, which is almost kind of as bad, right? Because at least if it's considerably whack, like we were talking about Big Girl on Nostradamus, it's polarizing at least, right? It
Yeah,
creates for
people
a
will
little,
talk about it.
people are going to talk about it. With this, it kind of just blends together, and that's what it is.
Yep.
You want to get into soul food?
Let's do it.
I'm going to let you tee this one off because admittedly we all have our strengths, right? In terms of our listenership here. You are much more privy to the entire Dungeon Family collective and how all of that came together, and even this particular album and time period. Again, released in November of 95, but they had been around for the past year and a half, and a lot of this material was recorded around that time period and leading up to the late 95 release.
Right. So this was Organized Noise. Organized Noise being the production. For
Yeah, I mean, that kind of just sounded like, well, it's organized
Yeah.
noise.
Right.
You want to elaborate on that? Yeah, so
Right.
if you don't know who
the
that
production team that does the Dungeon Family's projects. So Organized Noise had the year prior, Southern Playalistic Cadillac Music came out. That was Outkast's debut
Timeless.
album, and
Players Ball.
yeah, I mean, just which was released as a Christmas song. So
Got those jingle bells in it.
So the first time you heard Goodie Mob was on Get Up, Get Out, which is a great song, right? And you kind of immediately just hear the talent in these dudes. You immediately hear how unique CeeLo is as just a standalone person. He has the first verse on that, and when you hear that voice, it immediately captures you. So
Still does.
yep, still does. So this is now a year later or so, and Soul Food comes out. So this album, if I could just wax poetic for a second,
The floor is yours.
this album is I believe, in my estimation, that this is one of the most well put together pieces of art that hip hop has ever seen. I think of this album the way that people view a Public Enemy or a KRS-One or Common in terms of their conscious, the roots, in terms of having
Tribe.
conscious tribe, conscious rap, and really having super important and introspective and observant social commentary. This album is an absolute masterpiece when it comes to that.
1000%
and
agree.
it flows between that. Is the themes are, it's macabre, it's ominous, it's
Uplifting in spots.
it's also introspective, it's self-reflective, but ultimately it is uplifting. Through all of that stuff, it is ultimately
There's a message.
uplifting.
Right.
And the reason that I said at the beginning of this that I really enjoy the juxtaposition of these two albums is because from the Bone Thug side, you kind of have them saying this is what we do. This is where we from. This is how we got to get it. And then from Goodie Mob side, they're saying, okay, this is what we do, but why?
Right.
And how do we get out of that?
You know what I hate about really this time period in hip-hop? This album and the messages throughout, like this is, for people into socially conscious and aware type of hip-hop and you're going to get a message, this is every bit of that. But it wasn't treated as such because of how they sound. And at that time, there was still major pushback on Southern records. And this is as Southern of an album as you are going to find. I would argue this is like even
this
more
is among the most Southern albums that there's ever been.
More than Outkast, because Outkast was like eclectic and
well, and I will say this. I don't mean to cut you off, but you know I'm one of the biggest Outkast fans that there is.
For sure.
This album is as good as any album that Outkast has ever made.
I think this is my favorite album from the Dungeon family.
And that's fair.
Yeah.
And that's fair.
And even with because obviously the members of the group are Cujo, Timo, Big Gip, and CeeLo.
Yep.
CeeLo is the very clear star here.
And became such.
Right. I don't think that Timo and Cujo and Big Gip, what they lack in the lyrical dexterity in terms of how they structure their rhymes, you feel it. And
their delivery is thumping.
What do you want out of songs like this? You want to feel, especially when this is the message, right?
Yes.
Like when they're talking about on songs like Cell Therapy and Guess Who, and there's a lot of deep stuff here. I'd rather feel that artist than just have some rapidy rapper get on there and deliver it in the most technically structured way, so to speak.
This is one of the most brilliant, introspective. This is really a look into the psyche and the trauma of being a young black male, and and from their perspective, growing up in
the
what
deep
was
South.
termed the dirty South.
Right. First ones to, I believe, ever coin that term.
was coined. That was coined
on like the third song on this album.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but it served as, it didn't matter where you were listening to it. If you grew up in this environment,
right, it's going to resonate.
And I mean, they're really digging deep into the trauma that comes with. They're talking about, the government, the police, and all of this stuff that
is this designed
to keep you in, to keep us here,
exactly,
to keep us trapped, right? And then this is what comes from it. You talk about songs like Sesame Street, and it's so real. Like it's. I mean, they're talking about shit like hopelessness, like being suicidal, like giving up. Is that kind of thing where it's, you make a mistake or you do something because of the environment you're in, and now you might go to jail forever. So what do? They talk about on that song somebody that they were in jail with hanging himself,
right?
Because it's like, well, I can't face being gone forever.
Right.
So like
the L.
This is one of those things where this album is, it's that's why I love that it's called Soul Food.
Well, it feels like
because
that. Like
I feel like it's probably the most aptly titled album that there can be.
Yeah.
That's exactly what this is. And you feel you feel so many feelings throughout this, especially if you can relate to anything they're saying.
Well, even me, like
I
I can't relate to that, but
even
I feel
if
like
you can.
The way that they paint this, you envision it and you empathize with this, and like they're really taking you through every range of emotion in terms of all of their struggle. And yes, like I think Atlanta is primarily known as like the D-boy type of hip hop scene. There is none of that on this album. And I'm not saying that the D-boy thing is bad. Like, we've covered trap music. There are several classics like TM 101, like all this stuff,
absolutely.
But Soul Food, like when I think of this album, like I'm imagining like some dudes literally like getting it out of the mud here. Like it's the cornbread, the mac and cheese, the collard green. Like they give you that total South feel.
I mean, it's just, it talks about so many things that, a lot of artists are honestly afraid to even like speak on this. I mean, they even talk about stuff like that challenge of masculinity of having to be hard, like having to grow up and be hard, like because you can't be seen as weak.
You're prey if you're anything but that. So you kind of have to create this image, and maybe eventually you embody that and you become that. But it's not because you just wanted to do that.
Yeah,
it's cultivated from this environment.
I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. It's why I say it's like this is revolution music. It just sounds different.
It might not be dead prez in terms of how they're presenting it,
but sounds different. And to me, it sounds better. That shit is more palatable to me. Then I'm gonna be honest with you. I'd rather listen to this than KRS-One any day.
Yeah.
So like,
because Organized Noise does a hell of a job on these beats.
As we talked about, this is the total opposite of Bone Thugs. And that's no shot to their production.
Unique, yeah.
But this album is impeccably produced,
and it's crazy too because a lot of it is very simplistic. But it's not that every beat has to be like so multifaceted.
It doesn't
like sometimes
need to have 12 layers.
Yeah, sometimes simplicity, like especially when you're delivering, you don't want the production to overshadow this message either. And I think that there was such a perfect blend of that on this record, because like Cell Therapy, for example, and just real quick, Cell Therapy is like one of my favorite singles of all time, but we're talking
100%.
We went from talking about Bone Thugs. Now keep in mind, both of these albums were released in 1995. Bone Thugs, their first two albums are literally 8 million out the door.
Yep.
This barely pushed gold.
Yep.
You know, I mean, maybe it's certified platinum at this point, but like by late 96, this was a gold album, and I feel like it was just that stigma of the South still. But
that's what it is.
Right.
And I mean, it can't be overstated. Like CeeLo is the star of the show, and that's why he ultimately.
But it's having a good supporting actor, for example, like
everybody
that
did
enhances the project too.
Everybody did their thing on this album.
What's your favorite song?
It's Cell Therapy.
I would probably pick Cell Therapy, but if I had to go like 1B, I might go Goodie Bag.
It's funny you say that. I was just about to. That's why I was talking about CeeLo.
Yeah,
right?
because he's
freestyles most of that verse,
and he is,
if not all of it,
unhinged on that record.
Yes,
like his voice is hoarse. Like you feel what he's saying.
He's going to, even at the end of the verse, like it's almost like you know how sometimes somebody be in that pocket,
right?
And like they end it like, let me stop before I kill. Like
it
was that
before
kind of thing
keep going off.
Like he could have kept going. That is such a great song, and it showcases that talent, not just from him, but from all of them. This is a very talented group. Like, talent doesn't just mean that you are a lyricist, that you have these punchlines, that you have like, I'm wearing a Lupe shirt. Like, you don't need to be Lupe.
Right.
You don't need to be anything like that. Like, it's so much of it is your presence, your delivery, and the way that you know how to ride the beat. And they all can do that perfectly.
Still stick to the concept of this record.
They deliver the message every time.
Every single time. Yep. And the flows are, like, again, if you're comparing this to a lot of other hip-hop around the time, it is very different. And I could kind of understand why maybe initially it wasn't as digestible as like a player's ball, right? But, man, run through this and tell me, again, I say what they lack in lyrical dexterity, and I'm not talking about CeeLo, because CeeLo still has the bars, but like you feel that in range and emotion in terms of their subject matter and how they're approaching each record.
I think that this truly is just one of the most, I don't say this about a lot of albums for a deeper reason than for sonic purposes. Like, there's plenty of albums I'll tell people I really think you need to listen to this album. It's important that you hear this album. I'll tell them that because it's just a great album. It sounds good. You know, like, this is for more than that. I think people just need to listen to this album, because I'm not sure, if you're not a Goodie Mob fan, I'm not sure that you understand exactly what they were able to accomplish on this album and the subject matter that they were able to dive into on this album, and how they were able to take that kind of morbid reality and subject matter that they were
bleak.
talking about.
It's
very bleak. It's
Yeah.
very bleak. And it's angry.
Yeah.
And it's angry. And they were kind of able to always turn that into something almost spiritual and uplifting.
It has a very spiritual gospel type of tone to it as
and
well.
it ends in that way too.
Right.
The way the album ends is very much like that.
You know what's crazy
That
to me?
is so difficult.
It's almost impossible to pull off,
Yes.
especially with a 4-man group. Again,
Yes.
we're talking about groups you just don't see them anymore. So the
Right.
fact that they were all able to get together and put out a record as flawless as this, because I'm going to say it is. I think this is a 10 out of 10 album. If you are not familiar with Goodie Mob, and maybe you know CeeLo Green from Fuck You or Crazy, or maybe you know Big Gip from Grills, right? Or Ali and Gip when he partnered with Ali from the Saint Lunatics. Go back and listen to this because you'll thank us. Trust me. I think that, like for me, for example, I didn't discover this until, man, I was maybe 16, 17, 18 years old. And those songs that we just referred to, the singles from like the individual artists, like I had heard all of those, but I didn't really dive into soul food until I was almost done with high school, right? And shout out to Pat, our guy Pat. He's the one that actually put me on soul food. And it was just, I had a totally different perspective of every one of these members after I heard this.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this is a different type of revolutionary music than you've ever heard, but also the same. Like it's just delivered very differently, and it's very uplifting while also being extremely real.
Right.
There's no punches held back. There's
no over glamorization of just
there's none of it.
Sex, and you got a lot of that from Bone Thugs.
There's not yet. As a matter of fact, the only person. Oh, by the way, I'd be remiss to not mention. We did on this album get one of those absolutely timeless 3
Andre
Stacks
verse. I knew that's where you were going to go to. That's like
I can't
a verse
believe we
of the,
even waited this long to talk about
yeah.
it. But on Thought Process, 3 Stacks just.
I would say
as talented as what CeeLo is to Goodie Mob is what 3 Stacks is to almost anyone.
Yeah. Well, and just real quick with that song too. This came out in '95. Like, so you're getting classics from so many different artists, and I personally think that like Nas on Mobb Deep's "Eye for an Eye" is like the best feature of all time. But like, I think Thought Process, like Andre on Thought Process, like that, right? But I feel like Andre on Thought Process, it is one of those like, well, that's a verse of the year contender.
Easily.
Even in '95 where hip hop had never been better.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you also get I was going off of the point you were making about kind of nothing ever really being glamorized on this album. It's really, they're talking about things in a very real way and not trying to make it seem like it's this great thing. They're talking about it matter of factly.
Which is crazy.
This is what it is. This isn't what I wanted to be. This is what it is. In fact, I don't want it to be this.
Which is crazy because Atlanta literally embodies like
Yes.
the opposite of that and has for like the better part of 20 years where it's just glamorizing.
The one moment I will say on this album where that is happening is, and I do love the verse, but Big Boy's totally out of place verse on Dirty South.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of, he's basically just talking about like getting head and like nutting in some chick's mouth. It's weird. Like it's just kind of like it doesn't really fit the theme of the album, but it's a great verse because Big Boy's a great rapper.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a great verse, but it does feel kind of
out of place, especially when, I mean, this album I think is like 19 tracks or whatever, and it's like it all pretty much is gelled together in a perfect way. And you could nitpick that, right? But it is big. It is Big Boy, so the flow and the delivery and the voice is there.
I would just say if there's ever something being glamorized on this album, is that he kind of is like glamorizing like the player lifestyle, whatever. Cool, that's Big Boy. Hell, that's Big Boy. That's what he does.
Yeah.
But
you know how I feel about skits too, but they don't bother me on this.
Oh no,
like they really don't.
No,
like
because they're great. They're creative and they lend to the album. It's not just some like some side shit that kind of was thrown in there for no reason, or like they just want to be funny.
Some
it's important.
Attempt at comedy, yeah, because like especially as the '90s went on, I feel like albums got so bloated with that bullshit.
Yeah,
but like it doesn't bother me on Soul Food because I feel like everything serves a purpose, and even like they're brief enough and concise enough to where like it'll start and then kind of just go into the next record, whether it's CeeLo harmonizing on Blood.
Yes.
Yeah. So like even that leading into the next song, I feel like it's there for it does well. It works well together.
It's funny you should mention that because the next song is Live at the Omni, 1 Million Niggas Inside.
Yep.
And that is truly a revolution song.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a like Storm the White House song.
Right. Like we're sick of this shit, man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's like the most fed up, angry song that there is on there.
Yes.
This album is amazing.
It's crazy how
it's legitimately amazing.
You know what's wild to me, Frank?
Every song is
right, and it's different too. It doesn't feel it.
There's
is not like
one
Bone
song
Thugs.
Sounds like another.
Correct
at all.
It is wild to me because we picked these two albums because they both dropped in '95. There's
collective groups.
Yes, the groups. Heavy cultural impact. Heavy commercial impact.
Yep.
And I hadn't listened to East 99 Eternal in so long. So I know how I feel about Soul Food, but I was hoping that I'd go back and really be like energized and be like, ooh, I don't know, man. Bone Thugs is, this is going to be a little tougher. It's not to me. Like, if anything, I'm more deterred from like the Bone Thugs catalog after going through those 16, 17 songs.
So I'll say, in contrast to that,
yeah, let's hear it.
Revisiting East 1999 Eternal, I like that more than
you did back then
I'd used to.
See, I was a big Bone fan in the late 90s, early 2000s.
I was, but I didn't care like that.
Right.
It was just so much other shit that, it's not like I was crazy about them, no pun intended.
Yeah.
I was lazy about them.
Yes.
So
not busy either.
I wasn't busy thinking about
You're probably
them.
wishing that you went back to this and
I can't do nothing with flesh.
I know.
So I do like this album more than I did then.
I don't.
But that being said, even with liking this album more than I used to, and even with listening to this and enjoying it in a way that I hadn't before, you know what? I think that album was perfect for it because I was listening to it while I was working. It's perfect for that.
What? Just work? Just throw it on.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be inclined. You're not going to be inclined to be like, oh, let me rewind that and hear what he said, or the beat where it's like, man, I got to run that song back.
It's just going, and it's all riding. It all sounds good.
Right.
It all sounds good on melodic. A continuous loop of sounding good.
That's a great thing for that's a great way to put that.
Right.
Because I do feel like it is like background music and that sounds so insulting. But I mean like you're not gonna focus on like, oh man, that's 16 right there.
This is an album that you could put on in the background while you're listening to Soul Food. And you can just
all right, we're going off the deep end here.
So
poor Bone Thugs, goddamn.
But it is a good album. I did enjoy it more this time around. However, even with that bump that it received from me,
it's 7.5 out of 10.
It's still not even sniffing
Soul Food.
It's not even sniffing it. Like it's like Soul Food is a true heavyweight, and I don't care how anybody feel it. Like it, I will never respect an opinion that says that this is not at least a great album. You don't have to say it's a 10 out of 10 like we feel. You don't need to feel like it's perfect, but you cannot tell me this is not a great album. Like I unless you're just one of these people. See, the way that my brain works, and it might just be the Southern mentality. If you don't think this is a great album, it's just because you rather hear
boom bap,
Jay-Z, or some shit that from up north. And it's like, okay, well, I can't respect. If you're just gonna come with your dusty ass Tim Boot opinion, then I can't really respect that.
If it's not like jazz rap or whatever it may be.
If you're not gonna keep an open mind and be able to listen to all different style, like West Coast cats sound different from Northern cats, sound different from Southern cats, and different places in the South sound different from other places in the South.
Sure.
New Orleans cats don't sound like, well, now everybody sounds like Atlanta. But
New Orleans,
except for
the New Orleans sound has kind of made a major, like the bounce sound has made a major comeback.
They never even went New Orleans. Like that, Atlanta.
Yeah.
Like Louisiana is its own thing.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about New Orleans. We're talking about BR. We're talking about Shreveport.
Yes.
So
they are their own thing, and they never really adopt anybody else's sound.
Right.
But everybody else.
Here's where I come down on this, right? Because I was like a considerably big Bone fan back in the day. I went out of my way to buy some of Busy's solo projects. Like I had some of these albums as they dropped in the late 90s, early 2000s. I held East 1999 on a much higher pedestal back then. So I was kind of a little bit not let down, but it was kind of just like, man, this is not how I remembered it. As now the nostalgia aspect of it, some of it just takes me back. But like just in terms of an actual project, it's like I'm looking at it like, man, it was all style, no substance, and I think that's why I gravitated towards it when I was a kid. I think
that's the best way to describe it.
And I think with Soul Food, it's by no means the most influential album to come from Atlanta, but I think it's the best album ever to be released from the ATL.
And I'm not going to argue with that.
Right. I don't think that anybody could definitively win that discussion if you're going against Soul Food.
Like you could say is, there's a million things you could say it is. Whether you went with something from Outkast, if you went with ATLians, shit, I'm not going to disagree with that either.
Or even if somebody...
Or if you went with Ludacris, or if you went with T.I., or if you went with Jeezy. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot of different ways you could go. You could go with Future, but I'm going to stop listening to you. So, there's a lot of different ways that you can go when it comes to Atlanta. By the way, Future, I know I just took that little side shot.
Yeah, you got to throw this in there now.
Future actually, it came up through the Dungeon family.
He's
a late generation Dungeon family artist. Like the first gen was Outkast and Goodie Mob, mm-hmm. and then you had like that second generation, which was like Killer Mike.
Even lesser known guys like Witch Doctor.
Yes,
there were some guys that popped up.
It was second generation, but headline I would say Killer Mike is like the headliner
for sure.
And then later generation Future,
mm-hmm.
which is it's still Dungeon fam. So that is where Future guys start. I can always respect that about him.
Even if the music isn't necessarily your
it's not my cup of tea, right. but he is stamped.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important to me. Like I think that's a really important. If you give a shit at all about Organized Noise and their impact, which is massive on hip hop, I think coming up out of that collective and having that stamp, that's something that gives me a certain base level of respect for you.
For sure.
So
the clear winner this week, guys, is Soul Food. I mean, let us know what you think in the comments. I'm sure the entire city of Cleveland is in an uproar right now, or maybe not. Maybe you can look at Soul Food and say, hey, this is better than anything that Bone has ever dropped, because Soul Food is better than a lot of projects that anybody has ever dropped. What did you just say?
Nothing.
Okay, well, until next week, we'll see you later. Peace.
Thanks for giving us a listen. Give us your feedback and let us know how you really feel. Subscribe, rate, review, and we'll see you next week.